Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And good morning, everyone. I am really happy to be here with you all today. And I want to first thank Rev Janice for inviting me to speak today. And just thank you all for welcoming me here. I'm honored to be with all of you, especially on Mother's Day. As Maria said, I have two little ones myself. And so I just want to extend a very warm, happy Mother's Day to all of you here who are mothering in some capacity. I also feel like since my talk title today is Stories of Love, it is a perfect day, given that it's Mother's Day, to talk about how we bring more love into the world. First, I want to talk a little bit, though, about the nature of storytelling first. Many of us tell stories to entertain one another. We tell stories to create meaning for one another. And those are all very valuable ways in which we use the art of storytelling. But stories are actually a lot more powerful than that. Stories shape who we are, and they shape the world around us. And whether you are telling your stories out loud or they're going on inside of your mind, stories provide meaning for us, they form our identity, and they form our life experiences. Neuroscience actually shows us that there's a theory called narrative identity theory. This theory suggests that the way in which a person tells a story is associated with their quality of life. And there are studies to back this up, which I think is really neat. There was a recent study done with a group of students, and they asked the students to start to take maybe a painful event from their past and rewrite it and reframe it. And so they asked all of these students to write about it with a more redemptive focus. So for example, if they had a past failure or a past mistake, they were asked to retell their story so that they focused on maybe a better outcome that came from the failure or came from the mistake. So students engaged in this process for some time, and researchers followed students until later in their life. And what researchers concluded is that not only did these stories help them, this practice help them reframe their past, it also influenced all 100% of these students' lives going forward. So this is where this theory comes from, and it's really powerful. Philosophers have long argued that there's a sense to which we construct our own reality. And in the teachings of Ernest Holmes and New Thought, we very well are familiar with the phrase, change your thinking, change your life. And our beliefs, our core beliefs, inform our narratives, and they inform the stories that we gravitate towards. And so this actually has a huge, huge impact on our life experience and on what unfolds for us. Some time ago, I was having chest pain. So I called my advice nurse and she said, hey, you better go to the emergency room. Chest pain is really serious. So I was driving over in the car, and on the way over, I kept thinking, okay, I have this family history of pulmonary embolisms. And for those of you who don't know, those are blood clots in the artery of the lungs. And so I'm driving over there thinking, oh my gosh, it sounds like it's a blood clot. I was kind of freaking out a little bit, and I get there, and all the doctors and nurses are coming and asking me all these questions. I had an EKG done, x-rays, they gave me a blood clot test. I had all this work done. And finally, the doctors and the nurses said, okay, well, we'll be back in a little bit with your results. And it was a really busy night in the emergency room. So I was in that hospital room for a long time by myself. And I remember through all the questions that the doctors had asked me, I had solidified in my mind that this was a blood clot. I was already feeling sorry for myself. And I'm sitting there like, oh man, I've got a blood clot. I've got two little kids. This is no good, right? And at some point, since I was in there for so long by myself, at some point I kind of snapped out of it. And I remember thinking, wow, Sarah, you're just waiting. Like, you have no idea what this is. Nobody has solidified anything for you yet. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, Sarah, if a friend called you up and said, hey, I'm in the hospital, I've got chest pain, I think it's a blood clot, I'm really scared. I remember asking myself, how would I support my friend? Would I tell them, oh yeah, with your family history, you definitely have a blood clot, I'm so sorry, right? No, I would not do that. And we oftentimes treat other people better and more mindfully than we treat ourselves, right? And so in that moment, I really realized, okay, Sarah, what would you do for your friends? Well, I would stop. I would affirm their divine wholeness. I would see white light moving in through and all around them. And I would see them as whole and complete and perfect. And I would know that truth for them. And so I realized that I had to do that for myself. I had to acknowledge I was scared. I had to acknowledge that I was telling myself this story about the blood clot. And then I needed to shift my focus. So I got really quiet and I imagined white light all through in and around me. And I remember after doing this for some time, I started to see myself as a creative center of life. And I started to feel really empowered in that moment that I could actually reframe what I was telling myself. And so as I was doing this work, a few moments later, the doctor came in. He said, "Hey, Sarah, all your tests came back negative. You're good to go. You don't have a blood clot. You don't have all of these things. You're fine. We don't know what's wrong, but you're fine." And I remember thinking, I felt so much gratitude. I felt so much gratitude for the doctors and the nurses and for everyone who helped me. But I especially felt so much gratitude for my time waiting. I had this time waiting to give myself space in between the old story and then the opportunity to reframe a new one. And I still to this day feel so much gratitude for that because I remember it still now and I put it into place whenever I find myself gravitating and solidifying a story in my mind that does not serve me. I feel like in many ways, the past 2 years, we have all collectively been waiting, right? It's like we're all waiting to exhale. It's been a crazy last 2 years, with the pandemic and now with what's going on in the Ukraine and what's going on politically. It has felt really unsettling. And I think many of us have been waiting to feel some sense of certainty. We've been waiting to feel our familiar routine again. We've been waiting to feel balanced. We've been waiting to see balance around us, right? A lot of us have been feeling this way. And I believe that in this time of waiting, it's important to be mindful of the stories that we're telling ourselves just for the sake of certainty and just for the sake of meaning. The blood clot story definitely provided certainty for me, right? And it gave some sort of context and meaning, but was it really serving me? And did it really allow me to have agency in my life and in my health? I believe that waiting periods can be times of transition and they provide a space between where we've been and where we are headed. And it's a powerful time to frame our stories in such a way that we actually get to where we want to go. And we have the power to do this. I also believe that we are starting to realize collectively that the way that we've been living is no longer sustainable. And if we're really paying attention, we can see that we have a space, we have an opportunity right now to create something new, to create a new way of living. We can also see that the old stories, the old ways of being are crumbling all around us. Just look at what's taken place this last 2 years. People who used to go into an office every single day, many of them are working from home. People are adapting complete new technology to thrive and survive in their work. People are moving across states. They're packing up and heading out. People are changing careers. I mean, this is a time of drastic change. I feel like the amount of destruction, turnover, and new birth that we've seen in the last years is truly astounding. Never did I think I would see this in my lifetime. And so we are really seeing that the old things that we identified with and the old ways in which we did things, we're letting go of those and we're embracing a lot of newness right now. And I think also we have to acknowledge that for many of us, it can feel like we've been swept up in it all, that we're just kind of moving with all these drastic changes day to day. But I really do believe that if we notice the space that we're in, that we do have the power to influence our lives going forward and to influence what we see happening around us. Dr. Bruce Lipton, who's a biologist and epigeneticist, said, "We must find a way to walk outside of the old story and build a new story so that we can have a spontaneous remission of the planet's ills." So how do we do this? How do we have a spontaneous remission of the planet's ills? How do we walk outside of the old story and then create a new one? How do we use this time to create a world that works? Telling myself, I acknowledged that I was scared. I acknowledged that I was telling myself a story about this inevitable blood clot. So that was the first thing I did, was I had to acknowledge the story I was telling myself. Then I also really acknowledged my feelings. I honored how I was feeling presently. And then the last thing I did was I shifted my focus to a new narrative. So those three things are very powerful. It's a very powerful practice: acknowledging your story, honoring your feelings, how you feel about it presently, and then thirdly, shifting focus to a new narrative. In order to walk outside of our story mindfully and tap into the healing power of storytelling, we have to be willing to face all that we've been telling ourselves and all that is in our present reality. I don't believe that we can get to spontaneous remission by denying how we're feeling or denying our present reality. So in order to carry ourselves forward into something greater and brighter, we must tell ourselves a story that honors our past and our present. I want to talk a little bit now about the basic elements of a story. So we have a main character in a story, usually, or a main group of people who are faced with a problem. And then they usually run into some sort of helper or guide. And from there, they develop a plan of action. Sometime after that, they are met with a threat of failure, and then they ultimately find success. They ultimately overcome the obstacles. These basic elements are found across most mythology, literature, film. So you see these basic elements. And what neuroscience tells us is that when we move from fear and suspense to hope and redemption, as we move through that, as we're listening to or watching a story, we release cortisol, and then we release oxytocin. And the combination of those two actually have been shown in studies to help us integrate trauma and painful experiences. So storytelling is very powerful. Oxytocin has also been shown in studies to connect us to the story so that we actually are embodying what's happening. That's why when we watch movies, sometimes we're like cringing or crying, or we're really embodying it. We're really moving through the story. And so when we do this, all of us here who do prayer work, we know how important it is to embody our prayers. And so this actually happens naturally through the art of storytelling when we release oxytocin. The final study shows that stories help us to organize our thoughts and structure our thoughts in such a way that we are facilitating healing. And for those of us here who have done grief work, we actually know too how important stories are to move through our grief and to have our psyche process the grief and the trauma. So, we have all the last 2 years been through a global collective trauma, all in our own ways. That what has happened in the past 2 years has affected each of us in different ways. And it is warranted that we need some healing, right? We need a little bit of that, right? And so we can actually tell ourselves a story that bridges us from fear and separation to an outcome of love and connection. And through that story, we can actually influence how we identify with what's happened and also what we are going to experience moving forward. Again, this is narrative identity theory. Ancient civilizations knew the power of healing. And so they told stories not only to provide meaning for themselves in future generations, but they also told stories to positively affect everyone around them in such a way that they would facilitate healing and move through painful and challenging situations. So it's actually been known for a long time, this power. Joseph Campbell, professor and author of comparative mythology and religion, wrote, "It has always been the prime function of mythology to supply the symbols that carry the human spirit forward, in counteraction to those who tend to tie it back." Right now, we have lots of evidence of those who are trying to tie it back. And so we get to decide, we get to choose within ourselves to be creative centers of life, to choose a story that embraces love, that embraces awareness of our oneness. Storytelling weaves into the fabric of our reality new possibilities. I now want to talk a little bit about archetypes. For those of you who don't know what archetypes are, they are reoccurring symbols and motifs that we find throughout literature, mythology, dreams, and film. So archetypes are kind of our symbols for the main themes that we see running through our lives. And the reason I want to bring this up is because I really believe that for a long time now, media sources have been playing on the archetypal story of the hero versus the destroyer. And we have different media sources highlighting different heroes and different destroyers. So as you can see by my two hands here, we've got one camp who thinks the heroes are over here, and then we've got one camp over here that thinks the heroes are over here. And they're very opposing. And by the space in between, you can see the divide that this creates, right? And this is the divide that we're seeing right now in humanity. And so the media perpetuating this archetypal story of the hero versus the destroyer is actually perpetuating the polarization of humanity. And so what I believe is happening right now in this last 2 years is we have been given a space. We're in a waiting period. We're in a transition period. We have been given a space to see things clearly. We have been given a space. We are being called to something higher. We are being called to rise above this, right? Come right above it, and to be able to see that the truth is love. The truth is oneness. The truth is interconnectedness of all of life. We are being called to see the opposing sides as part of the whole. And this is not an easy task, must I say. we are living in some very divisive times, but I really do believe that this is what we're being called to. So we can tell a story that has us moving through all that we've been through and honoring all that we've been through the past 2 years, but that shifts us into something kinder and more loving. We all have that ability. I also believe that we gravitate towards the stories we do and the narratives in the different camps. We gravitate towards those based on the perceptions we formed during our past experiences. And I have to say, I don't know about all of you, but over the course of the pandemic, my perceptions have shifted drastically. And so it's important for us to note that our perceptions are not who we are. They're malleable. And so rather than hold tightly to whose perception is right and whose perception is wrong, I believe it serves us better to look at the stories in each perception and identify whose stories are filled with fear and whose stories are filled with love. And sometimes there's a little bit of both, right? There's a little bit of fear in two of the camps, right? And so I think kind of pulling the love out and really focusing on the love of the two camps, it's a really good place to start. So it's really important to look at what stories are really going to serve us in this waiting period, in this liminal juncture. And as I said before, it is not easy to walk outside of our old stories. It takes courage, it takes integrity, it takes faith. We have to be willing to look honestly at the stories we've been telling ourselves this whole time and the ones we've been identifying with, and to really look, are they rooted in fear or are they rooted in love? And being gentle with ourselves in this process is so important. I know that I have gravitated towards stories of fear and mistrust in the last 2 years, and I have had to pull myself out a number of times. So please be gentle with yourselves in this process. We've all been through something traumatic and extraordinary, and it is warranted that we might get, a little caught up in the fear. But if we want to fully step into what I believe we're being called into, we have to tell a story that honors our past and how we felt about it and how we feel about it, and then that shifts us forward into something that is greater and into something that is aware of our interconnectedness, of our oneness. Dr. Craig Sawyer, President and CEO of the Philosophical Research Society, said, "The pandemic is ours, it belongs to us. Or better, perhaps, we belong to it." I'm going to say that one more time. The pandemic is ours, it belongs to us. Or better, perhaps, we belong to it. There is so much love and trust in this statement. When we tell our story of the pandemic, will it be one of redemption? Will it be one that highlights our experience as this time belonging to us and us to it? And so to highlight this a little bit more, I want to lead you all in a process. So I'm going to ask first that you take a deep breath. We're just centering. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, or you can cast your eyes downward. And as you settle into the here and now, I invite you to imagine that you're in a garden. And take a moment to look at what's in your garden. What type of plants are there? I'm sure there's all types of colors. Notice the variety of colors in your garden. Look around. Look at what type of animals there. Are there worms? Are there flies? Are there birds? Are there squirrels? Just notice the diversity and the variety in your garden and take it in. And as you continue to look around and observe this, I want you to notice how all the different organisms are working together to create the beauty that you're experiencing. And just be with that for a moment. And now as you're looking around and you're seeing all these different organisms working together, all shapes, all sizes, all varieties, I want you to imagine that you're contributing now if you haven't done that already. I want you to see yourself getting in there and being part of this ecosystem, part of what makes this beautiful. And notice what you do to contribute. And as you start to become one with this garden, I want you to also notice what it feels like to be part of this ecosystem, what it feels like to care for this garden, working together in harmony. And notice where you feel that in your body. Just spend a little bit of time with that feeling working in your garden. And when you're ready, I want you to take a couple of deep centering breaths and bring your attention back to the space that you're in. And just grounding yourself in your space. And you can open your eyes if you feel comfortable, or you can keep them closed, whatever you'd prefer. And as we return our attention back to the space that we're in, I want us to consider for a moment the potential for humanity. If we were able to tell a story that had us working together, all varieties, all diversity, in harmony, to build something that feels like your garden. I invite you this week to take a look at the story you've been telling yourself about what's been happening the last 2 years and identify that story. And just simply notice, is this rooted in fear or is this rooted in love? And again, please be gentle with yourself in this process. We have all fluctuated between fear and love in this time of great uncertainty. And then once you acknowledge that story, I want you to rewrite your story, honor your past, honor your feelings, and then just rewrite your story to where you come out of it living somewhere that feels like your garden. And then I invite you also, if you have time, to share this story with someone that you love. I really believe that together, through sharing stories like this together, we can actually build somewhere that feels like this garden. We can build somewhere that takes us across from fear and belief in lack and separation, across that bridge to love and awareness of our oneness, of our interconnection. If we really do understand our oneness, we will heal that divide. And so now I would like to invite you to join me in prayer. And as I take a deep breath in, placing my hands on my heart, I invite you to do whatever is comfortable for you to drop into this space of prayer. Knowing that there's one breath, one life, one power moving through all spaces, one field of energy that is love, that is God, that is life, moving through all spaces, moving through all beings, moving through my being. Knowing that love is the true foundation of all. And that love binds us to one another, that love interconnects all of life. I know right here and right now that the truth of that love is present. I know that unconditional love is the truth of each of us here, the truth of this space, and the truth of our lives. I know that when we tap into that, we heal all seeming divides. And I see that so clearly right here and right now. I am so blessed and grateful to know this truth. I am so blessed and grateful to share my story, to share this with each person that is present today. And in absolute gratitude for the musicians and the technicians and every person, the readers, the prayers, every single person who brought this experience now, in deep gratitude, in absolute recognition of our oneness, our interconnectedness, in absolute recognition of the underlying field of energy that is love, that is the foundation of all things. I release our time. I release this experience into law, into the divine presence that is always unfolding, always at the heart of all. And as I release it, I simply let it be, blessing it all, giving great thanks to God, and so it is.